who retired as professor of urology, and Mrs. Savitri, she was the first nurse who helped me, and Mr. Ranganathan, he was not a perfusionist, he had never seen a heart lung machine, but he was a signal and telecommunications technician ICF. And you can see Dr. Girinath. Girinath and myself, we were colleagues. I joined in railways in 1975 June, and Giri joined in September. And that is me. And there, Dr. T. Radhakrishnan. He was MD, but he was a cardiologist. And Dr. R.K. Kalyan Singh, I would say that he is the first cardiac anesthetist of this country. Now, you will see that this is a train accident which occurred in Sirpur, Kagas Nagar. This is when I went to Delhi to present our first series of infants. We had done 11 infants, all below 10 kilos of weight. 10 kilos of weight. There was no open heart surgery was being done in kids less than 15 kilos. That only BSD. And I happened to, I had to travel by train because my salary at that time was 1,071 rupees per month. And I was an ad hoc KMO in the railways. Now, this is the first coronary artery bypass surgery done in this country, which I never knew that this was the first one. Surface cooling for infants, and this was the first 4-channel monitor we had, which was made by HP. And this is an Olsen pump, and this is our ICU setup. This kid had a total AV canal repair, and the child was 2.8 kilos. And this is another thing which we had introduced in Australasia, that is first EMR. That was in December 1994. Now again, Tamil Nadu. Now people will say about transplant, it is, see, doing a transplant or something is not a great thing. But what is important is, did we have a brain death legalization? We never had. You will say PKSN operated a transplant. We never had brain death legalization, and he had to put a very bad show in Cape Town, where 8 surgeons of the world were there. And Don Ross asked Dr. PKSN, have you got brain death legalization in India? In fact, that was a dead heart. So it was very difficult. Even today, I am facing a lot of difficulties with all the bureaucracy, all the regulatory bodies, everything. Even though I came much, much before than anybody else. I should have been a very rich cardiac surgeon. But I am not. The NCLT, NCLAT, the bankruptcy court, everybody has declared me as bankrupt and insolvent. Nobody will accept it. But this is what I have gone through that. But the price, what I have paid for all these things. This is Dr. R. Srinivasan was the Principal Secretary of Health. And he asked me whether I can conduct a meeting in Madras, call all the eminent people and see what will be the reaction of people to find out about brain death legalization. About 500 people, Kanji, Swamiji, the Archbishop, like that, Mr. N. Ram, Prince of Arcot, so many people were gathered, and they all decided that India should have brain death legalization. And Then it was done in, meeting was done in Calcutta for the East, then Bombay, and lastly Delhi. It was taken up by in the both houses and it was passed. That is how the brain death declaration came. And brain death was and passed in the parliament. So we had the second chance to do a transplant. The first one was done by Dr. Venugopal in All India Institute. Mind you, then there is again difficulty. This is a private hospital where you don't have any other, departments. And All India Institute is a big hospital which has got neurology, neurosurgery, urology, whatever you name, everything is there. I am only saying this just to impress upon the young doctors who might be there in the audience that hard work, persistence is very important. So this is the second transplant that is, as far as we are concerned, this is the first transplant in private. It was done on 23/9/95. I am again stressing one fact, that is, the donor was a Brahmin lady and the recipient was a Muslim, and the surgeon, I'm not claiming that I'm the only one. My team, and which was headed by me, I was a Christian. But more importantly, that was the best birthday present I could give for my mother, because 23rd September was her birthday. Now, heart and lung transplant, there is nothing much about it. And this is the first heart and lung transplant we did in 2001. And that was for VSD with Isomec. And he has done well for 2.5 years. After that, he died of fungus infection.
After that,
now the infant transplant again. This heart is from Bangalore, from Manipal Hospital. And this is the first interstate heart transplant done. And that was on 21/1/2009. People talk about a lot of transplants now. This is not anything big. What you need is a team. Unfortunately, in other metropolis, this never happened. I'm glad that, I could be in Madras. Bombay, they are much better surgeons, much better hospitals, much better setup. But I don't think there was a teamwork there. Now, this is Don Ross inaugurating our first exclusively dedicated pediatric intensive care unit in 1987. Now, we used to operate a lot of kids. Those kids were all done in 1 week. We also had the opportunity to do 2 heart transplants in one night, which still happens to be the third in the world. First one was in upstate New York, second was in Newcastle upon Tyne, and the third one was by us. And both these people have completed. One is that was in 2014. That means they have completed 6-7 years. One got married, has got 2 kids. Now, this is an interesting girl, very interesting in the sense, she is very outward, outgoing type of girl. She is from Bangalore. Now, she had a transplant, first transplant, that was about 9 years ago, in September, 9 years ago. And she was doing well, and she went for a Paralympic. Came back from Spain, and then she rang up and her boyfriend rang up and said that she is very sick and they brought her from Bangalore all the way here. They stopped that, and by the time she reached the hospital, she arrested. So we had to put her on naturally ventilator and IABP. Hey, please stop that. Now this is the girl who had the second. She was on an ECMO, IABP, and ventilator for 4 days. We got a heart, and she had a retransplant. This is the first retransplant in the country. That was done on 20th September 2017. And this is, I think, 10th day or 11 days after second retransplant. Now, we also had the opportunity, I had the opportunity to start few institutions. One is Madras Medical Mission. This is the inauguration of Madras Medical Mission, and which was done by Dr. Christian Bernard. So Christian Bernard was there, Bob Karp was there, and Don Ross was there.
Global Congress of Cardiovascular Science here in Madras today. To visit the hospital where Dr. Cherian and his group of doctors are doing excellent work. I was very, very interested to see how advanced they are in that hospital. They were doing not only complicated acquired heart diseases, patient surgery, bypass, and transmyocardial revascularization new technique, but they were also doing very complicated congenital heart surgery. Now, I've always said, and I still maintain, that congenital heart surgery separates the men from the boys, because that there the skill of the heart surgeon is really tested.
So this is a medical college which we started, Pondicherry Institute, and this is our research center. And again, this is the only research center in this country. And this is the only medical SAEZ.
Okay, first year. 4.9 months. Yes, yes, okay. பதினாலு அப்புறம் only பதினாலு also. You know, it's popular because one is 56 members and all that. Just to get the opinion. You say all that, but like how much is the popular? Once in a while, sometimes I don't know. Only during day,
So this is our, I think it was organized by Fortis.
But if hospitalized, you don't relax, you have no symptoms. So just stay safe, normal. Keep a close eye on that.
The time
But
parameter.
it's not possible.
Over.
They called up for you 30 minutes. That they have to ask you to just commit with the 30 minutes.
അത് പറയട എത്ര മിനിറ്റുകൾ ഉണ്ട് ഇനി
Already told me.
PSA 166. More than 6 months. Right. Everything is fine, sir. I think.
It's a very difficult question. Number one, in spite of the fact that I was migrant costume and having a green card in United States,
Yes, sir. Okay, sir.
I had lot of
Sure, sure.
satisfaction.
Sure.
Let me go back to India and see
Saradapuram, second street. There.
what I have learned, whether I will be able to reproduce. That was one of the reasons.
So now you're taking Tylenol 75,
Secondly,
Extor 10, Pygenol, CCM.
I'm not
Yeah.
saying that I
And
did
Tyro paste you're taking, sir.
Dr. Govindan and he was really surprised to see me doing a aortic valve replacement because I believe at that time, 1971, 72, the aortic valve replacement mortality in India was
6.930. Same place.
and so he saw me doing aortic valve replacement and he was very happy and
These are all okay.
being a pure vegetarian
I'm not able to.
and my wife used to
Right.
he
Otherwise,
likes
that's the one place with a friction. That's what normal. Right. That's normal.
and so he said, why don't you come?
Yeah, you should.
No hard feelings.
So இப்போ வந்து you're taking how much you're taking now, sir?
8750 எடுத்துக்கிறேன்
I thought, yeah,
சில நாளைக்கு
that's
பார்த்தேன் இப்போ 2 நாளா ஒரு
கொஞ்சம் பெரிய போகுது.
இன்னும் ஒரு 2 நாள் எடுத்துட்டு மறுபடியும் ஆயிடுச்சு.
You better 87%. So I don't know.
problem.
Yeah, nothing.
I am not going to.
You got 87%. 1.5 plus 12.5. 1.5 plus
No,
1.5.
the other was Stalin. Same thing. Stalin.
You can check your weight and height, sir.
Threw away everybody who worked with him.
Yeah, நீங்க எடுத்து வந்துருங்க.
Yes, party.
I'll ask him to do it for 1 month.
Almost a lot of people. So, Video was also. The only other place was Australia also.
Sir, height and weight
You
first.
have anything there. So you can have a good start. And there was one man who was very keen, even though he could not operate. But he was very keen that cardiothoracic surgery should be started. That is my namesake. He gave all the encouragement. That is how we started. And the fifth case which I did on Friday, right? Saturday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
எத்தனை மணின்னு வரல
They said 8 minutes more.
8 minutes.
But I didn't know because
Can I just for the next one? 8 minutes more we have.
I started using specs only five years ago. We didn't have a group. We didn't have 7 hours ago, 7 proline, no proline at all. So it was about 8 interrupted sleep status and patient did well. Then I came to know that this is the first successful formula data. So after that, subsequently, whatever I did was the first. So how can I go back to Australia or US? I will be nowhere. So I thought this is the best place.
So now coming to certain other areas like where, I'm just only showing you where people have not attempted. This is a stem cell, cardiomyocyte, which we had injected in a 4-month-old kid in 2008, 2004. After 6 years, you can see. And now, the latest February 22nd, 18, I had a photo of her saying that she has become the captain of the cricket team in Bombay. Now, xenografts, nobody is doing it. I don't know why. See, here in Medak district, Andhra, there are 2 units. One is Al Kabir, the other is Alanson. Both the places they slaughter 600 buffaloes every day. See, all the things are being thrown away. Now, I have been always interested in doing things which others have not tried. So this is an abdominal heart. It's a heterotrophic transplant. This was, I'm still trying to see that no donor hearts are thrown away. If somebody is, ejection fraction is only 20, and if there is a donor whose ejection fraction The heart ejection fraction is 20. If you put 20 plus 20, it will be 40. Why should you throw it away? But for that, for you to prove, you should have enough evidence to show. That is why we had done 6 dogs. 5 did very well. This dog is after 1 week of double transplant. Now, the other thing is, we had got an Indo-Australian project, and this is what we call a Q heart, and we have implanted, and our Department of Science and Technology and TDB, they promised that they would give our share. And this project was signed by honorable prime ministers of both the countries. And still, this Department of Science and Technology owes us 2.6 crores. They have not paid one pi. After that, everything is over. They said, you are not eligible. That is the state of affairs of this country. Now, zebra fish. Not many people knew that zebra fish was here. We have a place where we have got zebra fish because the temperature of the water should be less than 19 degrees. So we are working on zebra fish for regeneration. Why zebra fish? It's a transparent fish. You can use a glass knife and chop off the tip of the heart, the apex of the heart. You will see in 48 hours it regrows.
This vast range of more than 7,000 specimens was subsidized by the heart of the elephant, buffalo, seal, and fish. In addition, 10,000 slides of cardiac pathology and histology of the conduction system of the heart forms a rich treasury of information.
We are trying to digitize the whole thing, and now this is 3D printing. 3D printing has been of very tremendous use for correcting complex defects, like this child who was for 4 months old. The child had a dextrocardia, situs inversus, LV morphology, single ventricle, bilateral BT shunt, which got stenosed and pulmonary arteries became atrophic. So we corrected it after we did this 3D modeling, and we closed the VSDs and ASD. We use 3 conduits. One is Dacron, that is number 1. Number 2, that is a bovine jugular vein. And number 3 is a homograft. Now this is a CSI. I think BC Roy Award. This is Dr. Satyavan Sharma.
This morning, I from BC Roy Award. It was so touching. Having known you for almost 4 decades, my pleasure.
How many more minutes?
4 minutes more.
That I asked questions.
That is
You have been
after
one
that
of the most
questions.
surgeons
Yeah.
this country has produced.
നീ ഇവിടെ ഇരിക്കെ
ശരി.
The wide range of
1
cardiac
minute
surgery,
ahead ആവുമ്പോൾ പറഞ്ഞാൽ മതി.
neonatal surgery, complex congenital heart surgery, coronary artery bypass graft surgery, valve surgery, transplant, pediatric transplant, adult transplant, transplant. You could do in wide range, which I think in today's date when we see, even if you put multiple surgeons, they will not be able to do this type of versatile surgery. Do you think in the current era, this can be possible that one cardiovascular surgeon for these types of things? What do you think is? As a person who is in cardiothoracic surgery, cardiovascular surgery for the last 4 decades, where are we heading?
First of all, in my time, say from 1975, I was interested only in profession and nothing else. If I was interested in money, I would not have left a $86,000 job coming and joining railways for thousands of rupees per month. Okay. So what is important to me was do whatever I can and whatever platform I can. There is a saying that you should be in the right place at the right time with the right people.
So, what is ailing in this country is research and development. If you look WHO, one doctor for 11,528. That is one nurse for every 483 population. You know, Dr. Favalaro did the first bypass surgery, but unfortunately, when he was called back to Argentina, he was offered so many things. But in the end, nothing was done. You know what happened to this man? He committed suicide by shooting through the temple. There was no encouragement from the government. The same thing happening in this country also. Regulatory bodies are terrible. Financial institutions don't bother about that. They want only interest. And I also happened to read yesterday or day for yesterday, more than 1 lakh crore rupees have been siphoned off by 14 people. But, India can't do anything. So when we are debating about future of young cardiac surgeons, this was the topic. Sorry, I took those slides. Has anybody thought of going into indigenous research to help the country and people along with clinical practice? I always tell my juniors, as far as surgery is concerned, any monkey can do it. The reason is, if you go to Sri Lanka, you can see that good, ripe coconut are plucked down by monkeys, trained monkeys. What do they need? Little peanut and one banana. See, have you ever thought of about a stronger economy, affordable healthcare, make in India, Mandara, all those things? We can talk. The Swedish initiative motto is this: there is no innovation without research, and there is no progress without innovation. India has a long way to realize all these dreams. What happened to Nalanda and Takshashila? Did anybody do anything? Except Dr. Abdul Kalam, because of his initiative, now there is a place, 2 rooms for research. No, recognition by one's colleague in a specialty by his own colleagues is the greatest tribute a professional can achieve. That is what I believe. This is the story of human ambition, struggle, sacrifices. You may succeed, you may not succeed, but at least you have tried your level best. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I can see half of the people left. So that means it was so boring. Nobody wanted to hear it.
It is a hybrid. Thank you, sir. We will get back to you after another 2 speakers. And now I request Dr. Dev Palajani sir to go ahead with his case-based discussion. Over to you, Dr. Dev sir.
Okay, I'll have to share my slides to you, huh? Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
okay, all right. I'll share screen. First, I'll open my presentation, right?
No, no, I think they said okay.
Okay. I have to open my presentation here. इसके पीछे हमारा presentation. इसके पीछे.
Hello.
Yeah, correct. Okay. Now, अरे,
I'm not able to see.
okay, 1 minute. अरे, इधर हो भाई. I want to go back to the, yeah, this one. Did you get my presentation? Hello?
Yeah, not yet, sir.
Not yet.
Not yet. There is a slide screen down, green button. Share the screen.
Yeah, you go to the, go here. No, no. जो पहले गया था ना, इधर का ग्रीन शेयर स्क्रीन गया.
Bottom of the.
You got it? You got it?
No, not yet, sir. Not yet.
Okay, then just press it here. Share, yeah, share.
Yeah, now we are able to see.
Okay, all right. Friends,
Can you make it full screen, sir? Full screen.
yeah, okay, I'll make a full screen.
120 80 BP, CBG 84, ECG, ECG, S3 bar people, yes, you have to do S3 bar people. ST absolutely, adilla capital letter, small letter code. For adilla capital letter, small letter. ST, CAD, இந்த மாதிரி சொன்னா அது எல்லாமே caps number.
Got it?
Yeah, yeah.
Dr. Sangram and Dr. Antani, Dr. George, Dr. K.M. Cherian, it's my great pleasure to speak something which is of a very clinical interest to most of the practicing cardiologists and physicians. First of all, I must thank all of you for having invited me for today's presentation and participate in the deliberations and going on in Gulbarga. I must admit that my lecture is not going to be so esoteric as was given by Dr. Cherian, because I am a very simple cardiologist who treats patients in his office and in the hospital and do the routine things that are sort of done on the day-to-day basis. So what I thought that I'll share with you some clinical cases, and the discussion can be on this, based on this clinical basis. First of all, let me go into the history of a patient. And you can see this is the patient who has an atrial fibrillation. Rajkumar, can you just show me? Who has an atrial fibrillation, and he is a 78 years male. He had a history of angina. He came to us with history of angina. He's a known hypertension, diabetic, and of course you saw he had an atrial fibrillation on ECG. In the recent history was that he had acute chest pain which was suggestive of acute coronary syndrome, and the EKG showed the steady changes. So naturally, such a patient in our hospital, in our hands, will undergo a coronary angiography. On the coronary angiography, what we saw that he had a critical tight RCA lesion here. This is the catheter injection into the right coronary artery. You can see critically narrowed right coronary artery, which was, of course, at the same time dilated with a stent. The stent was deployed at this place, and the TIMI3 flow was achieved. And the other artery that was occluded or diseased was the LAD. And one you can see there's a critical lesion in the LAD here. And that also was dilated. A stent was deployed in the LAD here. There was a TIMI3 flow. The vessel looks more or less normal. Now, so far, so good. Up to this now, you find that patient came with acute chest pain, came with acute coronary syndrome. You took the patient to the lab, you performed an angiography, and did the angioplasty and Descartes stents. But the patient had an atrial fibrillation. Now, we all know that atrial fibrillation patients got a risk of developing an embolic stroke. Most of the time, it is usually a cerebral stroke, and therefore, the patient develops hemiplegia, monoparesis, or the facial weakness. It can be in any part of the brain producing a stroke. So therefore, patients who are who come to us with atrial fibrillation, even otherwise, what we do is to calculate their risk of the stroke. And there are some criteria, there are some risk scores called as SHAD-WASH criteria score, which takes into account congestive heart failure, left ventricular dysfunction, it gives a 1 point, hypertension gets 1 point, age more than 74, 5 years 2 points, diabetes 1 point, stroke 2 points, vascular disease, myocardial infarction 1 point, then age 64 to 74 1 point, and sex category female 1 point. Why do we take this score? Because higher the score, higher is the risk of the developing a patient's annual risk of developing a stroke. So in our case, we found that the patient was more than 75 years, was hypertensive, was diabetic, had a acute coronary syndrome. So therefore, his score we calculated was 4. Therefore, his annual risk of the score will be 4. Now, therefore, the question comes, actually doing an angioplasty was no big deal, but the question came after finishing the angioplasty, what we should advise this patient on discharge. Because as you know, patients who undergo angioplasty have to be given a dual antiplatelet therapy with aspirin or P2Y12 inhibitors like clopidogrel, ticagrelor, or prasugrel. So therefore, they have to go with, because otherwise there could be a risk of stent thrombosis, restenosis, and death. So now there is an additional risk factor in this patient of developing a stroke, and that can be prevented by either warfarin or by the novel oral anticoagulants like dabigatran or rivaroxaban or apixaban. So therefore the question comes, on one side, you want to prevent the stent thrombosis. On the other side, you have to prevent the stroke. So how do you sort of mix and match the medical treatment or the pharmacological therapy to see that you save the patient from both these complications? So therefore, we have got many options. And I will put it to you that we have to think, A, should we send the patient with aspirin and P2Y12 inhibitors? Should we put the patient on aspirin plus P2Y12 inhibitors plus warfarin, which is an anticoagulant which will prevent stroke? or should we put the patient on aspirin plus P2Y12 inhibitors and novel oral anticoagulants like dabigatran, apixaban, or rivaroxaban for 1 month, and then take out one of the dual antiplatelet therapy, particularly aspirin, and then continue the patient only on P2Y12 inhibitor plus NOAC? Or should we send the patient only on a P2Y12 inhibitor plus NOAC? So it's a lot of thinking that goes on when you see a patient like this, who has got a high risk of stroke, and now he has got a stent, and he has to be on a dual antiplatelet therapy. So I show you what is the evidence to suggest that what will be the best option in a patient like this between these four options. Now let me give you in the form of a diagram. On one side, you have got an atrial fibrillation. You have to prevent stroke. You've done a PCI. You've got an antiplatelet therapy for prevention of stent thrombosis. So therefore, should you give a dual therapy with anticoagulation and single antiplatelet, or should you give a triple therapy with anticoagulation and dual antiplatelet therapy? Now, the answer was tried to be given by a trial called as a WOOS trial as early as in 2013. I also participated in this particular symposium, one of the speaker, in which the authors or the investigators took about more than 500 patients and randomized them to be either on triple therapy with aspirin, clopidogrel, and warfarin versus giving them clopidogrel and warfarin only. And what they found that if you gave a triple drug therapy, there was an extensive amount of bleeding, much more bleeding risk, quite more than 2.5 times as compared to the patients who were on a dual therapy. That is the patients who received only the clopidogrel and warfarin.
Oh, right.
And though the death rate, myocardial infarction, TVR, stroke, and stent thrombosis were more or less statistically not significant, but there was definitely it was in favor of a dual therapy rather than a triple therapy. Because when we do angioplasty, you must remember the bleeding is a very important risk of death and myocardial infarction. So we should prevent the death, prevent the bleeding to reduce the risk of death and myocardial infarction. So therefore, if you look at the CAT PCR registry, you found that patients who had a lower bleeding, 1.87%, had a much lower mortality as compared to the patients who had a major bleeding, if it occurred, say, which occurs about 3 times more than the patients who undergo angioplasty. So therefore, to answer this question in the light of the fact that now we have got a novel oral anticoagulants, one of them is dabigatran, is available under several trade names like Pradaxa and afogatran and all that. The investigators tried to put into theory that if you gave dabigatran with P2Y12 inhibitor, 150 milligram BID is the dose, and also they tested dabigatran 110 milligram BID with P2Y12 inhibitor versus triple drug therapy, warfarin, P2Y12 inhibitor plus aspirin. What are the end results in these patients when you compare three? They found that even if you gave just a dual therapy, combined dose, whether 110 or 150 milligrams twice a day, it was not inferior to the triple drug therapy. Actually, both of them, over a period of 720 days, they did equally well, indicating that whether you give 110 milligrams or 150 milligrams twice a day, along with P2Y12 inhibitor, it is as good as giving a triple drug therapy. As a matter of fact, if you look at the bleeding, 110 milligrams versus warfarin, 150 milligrams versus warfarin, the bleeding risk was much less in the patients who had a dual therapy, indicating that if you gave a dual therapy in these patients after PCI, along that is giving them the clopidogrel, ticagrelor, or prasugrel, along with a novel oral anticoagulant is good enough. You don't have to add aspirin to this. So therefore, recently the European guideline expert consensus decision has been taken, which says that if you have got you're concerned about the thrombotic risk. If you find patient has multiple lesions, multiple stents, left main disease, and a very sort of a craggy vessels, diffuse disease, then in these patients, at least for 6 months, you can give them a triple drug therapy. And then after 6 months, you can come to the dual drug therapy. If you're concerned with bleeding risk, patients who are thin, females have got some bleeding risk, there you may give to start with triple drug therapy only for 1 month and then come down to the dual therapy and to be continued further for 1 year. And after 1 year, you may just go to only oral anticoagulants. However, if the bleeding risk is very low, you may start with dual antiplatelet, dual drug therapy, one anticoagulant and one antiplatelet therapy. Now we'll come to the second case, which is again a very clinically important case. We see this in our day-to-day practice. Practically every week or every month, you will see a patient coming to you with this kind of a clinical scenario. And this we call as a late STEMI. You see many people who are sort of a catheter savvy, operation savvy. They don't care when the patient of stent myocardial infarction present to you. Nobody cares about taking an appropriate history. It's very important to take the history, the onset of chest pain when the patient was diagnosed as a case of STEMI. Now here's a case which I call as a late STEMI. Here is a patient who is a 60 years male with a chest pain and sweating 3 days back before he presented with this kind of an ECG with an ST elevation in the anterior leads, marked ST elevation in the anterior leads. He has complained now, and he had a chest pain and sweating. He has now feels low and ever since, and he feels fatigue. His pulse is 100 and BP is 110/80. Now this is very important to look at this because here the pulse pressure is only 30. That means patient now has presented to you with a diminished cardiac output. Patient is vasoconstricted at this time. Patient has H3 gallop, has few creps. ECG, as you saw, shows an anti-wall infarction and with T-wave inversion. Now, why patients present to us late? Now, symptoms duration more than 12 hours, if it is there, we call this a late STEMI because your chances of salvaging myocardial infarction are best within the first 12 hours. Earlier you do, better it is. I'll show you the graph. Now, why do they come late? Most of the time, it has been found that any study, 8.5 to 40% of STEMI patients are late presenters worldwide. And in our create registry from India, 30% of the STEMI patients are late presenters. Now, why do patients present late? Because most of the time, old people are neglected about the age of 55. Patients who have been chronic with prior congestive heart failure, with a prior myocardial infarction, had undergone CABG, now they are neglected. Then female gender is very, very important to know I mean, most of the time, we don't look after our female patients well. Diabetics, because their symptoms are not very clear cut, so many times they are also missed. Then, of course, pulmonary edema, systolic blood pressure, all that. These are the factors which make them present late. Now, what is important of late presentation? Because if you see the earlier you do intervention, better are the survival. Your time window is usually 4 to 6 hours. So if he presents late, on the contrary, you may find that the patients do bad. Now in this patient, the dominant findings are late presentation, narrow pulse pressure, crepitations, indicating that the patient is in failure. He has got a reduced cardiac output by UC, he has got crepitations, and he has got an S3 diet. Now, the immediate treatment in this patient should be what? Medical, or should we take the patient to the lab and perform an angio and perform an angioplasty? If you don't want to take him for immediate, then when you should take him for the angiography and angioplasty? Then what are the benefits of late presenters if you did late PCI in this patient? Very important in these patients is to do the viable studies. And which are the viability studies you do and when you should do, I think we'll talk about that. Now, our principle is that all patients stent, whatever time they present, we do a coronary angio in all myocardial infarction. Only thing is that we judge the patient clinically. Clinically, we use our clinical judgment and then decide on the time. We carry out few investigations and then decide on the time. Very important is to do a 2D echo immediately. If you find that the echo shows a total thinning scar, it is totally scarred and myocardium markedly thinned out, then you do a late. Don't do immediately because now there is very little chances of a viable muscle. If the thickness is preserved, then you can take a patient immediately after stabilization. Then if you are not able to decide, one can do the viability studies with low dose dobutamine stress echo, in which we give 5 micrograms of dobutamine to be injected slowly, or you can do a cardiac MRI or do a PET scan, which will give the viability. The initial treatment is a foregone conclusion. You give antiplatelet, beta blockers like carvedilol, ACE inhibitors. There's no role for ARNI in this acutely ill patient because there's no data on using ARNI in the patients who present late STEMI and or in left ventricular failure. I'll just show you one trial, what is called as an OAT trial, which wanted to see the strategy of routine PCI of total occlusion within who presented and to do an angiography and angioplasty immediately. In this, patients who presented late and 1,082 patients were given were taken for the angio and stenting immediately, and about 1,084 on the medical therapy, and then they did the angiography after doing the test. What they found that if you did the immediate PCI versus medical therapy, there was no difference in the outcomes. That is, there was no difference in the primary endpoint of death, reinfarction, or New York Heart Association classification for class 4. So patients did not do well if you took them immediately for the angiography and angioplasty as compared to the medical treatment. However, there has been a BRAVE 2 trial in which patients who presented with myocardial infarction more than 12 hours, they were taken for the invasive therapy if necessary and randomized to PCI time 1 to 5 hours later. In these patients, they used the apixaban. Here they found that the infarct size was smaller as compared to the conservative treatment. However, they did not find any difference in the 30-day clinical endpoints of death, myocardial infarction, or the stroke. So therefore, there was no long-term or 30-day benefit, though the infarct size was small. So how do you manage this patient? So there is a trial called, which gives you some guidelines, called trial called trial, stenting and maximize. After doing the radionuclide studies, and if you did that, if you found that the patient had a viable muscle, and then you perform the angioplasty in these patients, the death myocardial infarction was lower in the patients who had a viable muscle on the viability test. The death myocardial infarction was lower if you perform an invasive treatment immediately as compared to doing it late. So why am I saying this, stressing again and again not to take these patients immediately for the angiography and angioplasty? We have burnt our fingers. We see here the patient who has got a total occlusion of the LAD, came about 16 to 18 hours late. We did not know what was happening, and we immediately took a chance. We took him for the to the cath lab, and what do you see? The entire clot has fragmented, caused a microembolization, and you see no reflow completely. And you'll encounter this in the patients who present to you late. The clot is very friable, and you find that there's a microembolization. In such patients, we let the patient to stabilize. So therefore, in the light of all this, what are the guidelines, European Society of Cardiology guidelines, especially in asymptomatic patients, routine PCI of an occluded infarct related artery more than 48 hours after onset of STEMI is not indicated. As a matter of fact, it gives a class 3 indication. That means if you did the procedure, you will do more harm. So I think, keeping in mind, you have to use your judgment, use your clinical acumen, use the echo, and do some viability study, especially with the dobutamine space echo, and see whether the patient is fit to undergo for an angiography. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for your excellent thought-provoking deliberation. There are a few questions in the chat box. We will take at the end. I will ask you to rejoin once session is over. Thank you. Now I request Dr. Vivek Javdi to deliver his talk. Jenny, sir, can you stop sharing the slides?
I'm trying to do that, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I'll come out. Okay.
Yeah, fine, fine. Sir.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm audible. Good afternoon, and I will try to come to the points directly. The topic that I'm speaking about is that there are a lot of controversial topics that have come up, and a general physician, a non-invasive cardiologist, when there are the general practitioners, when they are referring patients, they are caught in a dilemma in some of these controversies, whether they should be sending it to a cardiac surgeon or a cardiologist. And this dilemma becomes more intense when if the patient himself or herself is a family member, or sometimes the doctor himself is a patient. So I'm just going to pick up some of these issues and tell you a little bit dogmatically, so that my translation becomes more simple to you, and I will not get you caught in too much of morass of literature. So referring a patient for cardiac surgery, some confusing issues. Bypass surgery, which is the commonest. Stents or bypass, which are the correct indications. Full sternotomy, or there too much of noise now about minimally invasive cardiac surgery. Should I really insist on my multivessel coronary artery disease patient for MICS and send him searching for a surgeon who will do that for him? Proximal LED tight stenosis. Are there any patients who would rather benefit from a minimally invasive direct coronary artery bypass with an internal mammary artery? Will they get a fantastic long-term outcome? The low ejection fraction patients. Should I be doing these MRI perfusion studies, thallium perfusion studies? Which are the patients which may have to go for CABG bindas, or which are the patients I must stop them and think of heart transplant? Ischemic mitral regurgitation, if I have seen in Gulbarga and I'm going to send him somewhere else, and I saw that there is a mitral regurgitation, which are the patients I must put my foot down and tell my surgeon with whom I'm dealing that I better get this mitral valve fixed? And the post MI VSD, when it happens, what exactly is the strategy? How do you make sure that you get a less mortality? And how do you save these patients? The significant carotid artery stenosis, surgical endarterectomy, or should I send him for stenting? Because it's so expensive. The severe aortic valve stenosis, there is so much of noise about TAVI, transcatheter aortic valve replacement. Which are the patients I should still send to the surgeons only, and which are the patients I may listen to the patient's relatives, because they are all learning from because there's so much of noise in the internet that all the youngsters will pressurize their parents and uncles and aunties and say, go for TAVI. What should be my role? What do I advise them? Endovascular stent grafting for aortic aneurysm. Where do I send them for stent grafting? Where do I send them for open surgery? HOCM, HOCM, surgical resection or septal ablation. Whom do I send them to surgeon? Do I send them to the cardiologist? Significant cardiac stenosis, of course, I spoke about it. Now let's start with the CABG. This is whatever I show will be some heavy material, not some frivolous, flirtatious papers. AHA ACC guidelines for CABG. And the thing would be, a lot of these slides you would not be seeing at all because you hardly listen to a surgeon, and much of the slides will be prepared by the companies and you will be seeing them because there's a lot of literature control suddenly from all these heavyweight device companies. AHA-ACC guidelines, if you look at this side is a CABG and that side is the drug-eluting stents. If you look at different cohorts, wherever you see the green are heavy evidences favoring the bypass surgery. So instead of complicating to you, just look at the colors and we'll go to the next slide. Now let us dissect that. What does it mean, these American AHA and ACC guidelines? Class 1A, Class 1B, Class 2. Now Class 1A CABG for patients with significant LMCA disease, evidence is A. CABG patients with triple vessel disease, especially if that left main is little complicated and not very osteal or just the mid body and tight and very isolated, because those are actually not very common disease. CABG for patients with triple vessel disease, the survival benefit is greater in patients with abnormal LV functions, that less than 50%, and that level of evidence is class 1A. CABG for patients with two vessel disease with significant proximal LED and CAD, and either abnormal LV functions, especially, then the evidence becomes A. So these are all very important indications to go for surgery, and don't get caught into any morass of literature or any morass of intelligent talking. Class 1B or C, CABG for patients with one or two vessel CAD without significant proximal LED. Then for patients with one or two vessel CAD without significant proximal LED, who survived sudden cardiac death and sustained ventricular tachycardia. The PTC or CABG for patients who have not been successfully treated by medical therapy and can undergo revascularization with acceptable risk either way. Evidence is B. Class 2A, repeat CABG for patients with multiple saphenous vein graft stenosis, especially when there is significant stenosis in a graft supplying the LAD. CABG for patients with 1 or 2 vessel CAD without significant LAD, but with moderate area of viable myocardium and demonstrable ischemia or non-invasive testing. PCI or CABG for patients with 1 vessel disease with significant proximal left LAD disease. To be compared with the CABG, PCI for patients with 3 or 2 vessel disease with significant proximal LAD who have anatomy suitable for PCI and who have a treated diabetes or abnormal LV function. Repeat revascularization may be necessary after either CABG or PCI, and the rate is lower after CABG. Incidence of stroke is similar between both. There is potential survival advantage with bypass surgery for some people with multivessel disease by CABG. Now, the European guidelines. If you look at class 1A, look at all these cohorts for prognosis, and the last one is for symptom relief. In this diagram, again, these European guidelines, what favors PCI, what favors CABG? Let us look at the CABG. On clinical characteristic, patients who have diabetes, patients who have reduced LV ejection fraction, contraindication for DAPT, dual antiplatelets, and recurrent disease, diffuse instant restenosis, solid indications. Anatomical or technical aspects, multivessel disease with syntax score of less than 23, more than 23. Anatomy, syntax scoring, everybody talks about, but nobody does. But anyway, I will just mention this. The anatomy likely resulting in incomplete revascularization with PCI. Severely calcified coronary artery lesions limiting lesion expansion. Need for concomitant interventions. Ascending aortic pathology, valve pathologies, and all that is understood that it has to be a CABG and it has to be a surgeon. Now, this important paper, which was published in American College of Cardiology in 2009, called Appropriateness of Criteria for Revascularization. And if you look at A, green, appropriate, U, yellow, is uncertain, and I, red, is inappropriate. Look at the cohort, look at this. Credo Kyoto, this trial and these guidelines from Japan, which was done from the Kyoto University, they have this funny English, coronary revascularization demonstrating outcome study, August 2011. And the guidelines were same as European guidelines, but surprisingly showed better outcomes with CABG than in low syntax scores less than 22. Mortality by syntax score in diabetics, 3 vessel disease, left main stenosis, diabetics and non-diabetics. Now this bar diagram speaks for itself. If you look at the green, that is CABG, and the PCI, the Texas is the blue. So when you go to diabetic, if you can see if the score is more than 33, it is extremely dramatic with diabetics. And so Freedom trial actually proved it beyond any doubt. And most of the doubts were all put to rest after the Freedom trial outcomes were published. The Freedom trial, New England Journal of Medicine 2012, from 2005 to 2010, 1900 patients, 140 centers, 29% women, and 83% had triple vessel disease. Conclusion: for patients with diabetes and advanced coronary artery disease, CABG was superior to PCI in that it significantly reduced rates of death and MI. If you look at this chart, high lesion complexity and insulin dependence, both of these are absolute indications that you better err on sending to the surgeon. This is a nice summary of what to do with a diabetic patient. So what are the actual indications? Let us come out of this morass. If you look at the HACC task force recommendations, simplified, is that LMCA, which is not discrete osteal or mid-body, that is a rare lesion. Diffuse triple vessel disease, especially associated with LV dysfunction. Diffuse double vessel disease involving proximal LAD and LV dysfunction, I would say, and or non-stentable proximal LAD stenosis. In my practice, I always give a low trigger for bypass surgery for patients who are not reimbursed. In India, it is not like the Western countries, and a large number of patients are helpless financially. So you must look at their future, look at less repeat revascularization, and whenever you're on borderline, air for surgery. You can, if you send to a good surgeon, you can have after 15, 16, 18 years grafts like this. That's a radial, that's a bilateral IMA, and this is a gastroeploic artery. The minimally invasive bypass surgery, we started in 1994. That was the first in Australasia region. 1994 of September was our first minimally invasive surgery. We were very enthusiastic, and like a monkey with a hammer in the hand, everything looks like a nail. We finished quickly 3,000 cases. And we realized that Lima to LAD, you can do very nice job and you can do within 60 minutes. And if you are actually joining with a cardiologist to do hybrid in some of the high risk dilapidated octo or nanogenarians, that's a very good operation. But as we came across when we were doing the distal OMs, PDAs and PLVs, we realized that we really don't do a good job, even in a good, skilled, experienced surgeon's hand. And so patients who require 4 grafts, 5 grafts, more than 3 grafts, not a very good idea. So talking about multi-vessel coronary disease, should I apply MICS or not? From my vast experience, I have become very negative about it. And if you look at the world, the capital economies in healthcare, India poor and America rich. This is the only places where there's a lot of noise on this MICS for MVD. And if you look at the literature, you will find that there are only 6 or 7 names who are writing all the papers. And most of the other people are not enthusiastic, though they may be more skilled, more experienced, and who may be routinely doing all their mitral valves, all their aortic valves, all their ASDs and myxomas, etc. by minimally invasive. Sometimes even HOCM, but they're not very enthusiastic like my team on multi-vessel disease, because we know that a lot of them are going to come back within 2 years. So this is another very provocative topic. Some of these proximal LEDs you see, and the patient is not well to do. And do you think doing a minimally invasive direct coronary artery bypass with a small thoracotomy, Lima to LAD, is a good option for them and not put a stent? There are literature evidences. This is a paper from 2004 that compared with mid-cap, LED stenting is associated with higher repeat revascularization rates. But this is 2004, is an old paper. 2014 again, is said the same thing. However, even with the use of DES, it was associated with significantly higher rates of repeat revascularization. So from our experience, we feel that it might be a good idea that if you are in dilemma, the little longer lesion, the diagonal is involved, I think, and if the patient is not financially well off, it doesn't have a reimbursement, I would always err in doing a minimally invasive Lima to LAD. This video is not working. I was just going to show you a cartoon on how the LV dilates after anterior MI, and aneurysm forms, the LV shape goes off. Should we be doing a LV? Hey, what's happening? Why I'm not getting any of these videos working? Okay, anyway, I'll forget about it. These were 2 videos which show you dramatically how beautifully you can reconstruct the LV, its size and the shape and that bullet shape narrowing. But the stitch trial, 1 stitch trial 2 showed that no, it doesn't really matter, and except the aneurysm, you don't bother. Aneurysm, of course, there is no, if you have seen aneurysm in a patient who requires revascularization and there is a definite aneurysm, you send for surgery because the aneurysm has to be fixed. There will be a problem in the future. This paper, stitch trial, what is the evidence that you have done a good job of LV restoration? You have managed the LV, you have brought back its size, brought back its shape to its normal, and so it will have a good longer outcome. You must do the echo pre-op and see what is the end systolic volume. And post-operatively in the ICU, check again how much nicely you have changed the post-systolic LV volume. In a systole, there should be very less volume. And if the LV is bad, the volume will be more. and the surgeon has done a good job, he will reduce. How much percentage he has reduced? The stitch trial was mostly done in the veteran hospitals in USA, which are government hospitals, mostly young people, not good surgeons, and but they keep on publishing a factory. And most of the time, the New England Journal of Medicine, which is a very cynical paper, journal. I have a very low opinion about a journal, and he keeps on publishing that. If you dissect and if you look at the great papers that have come up from Italy, from Germany, from United States, UK on this LV restoration business, one of the leader is Menicanti from Italy. You look at Menicanti, he's a teacher of all of us in India. He comes almost every year twice. And all of us have learned how to do LV restoration from Menicanti directly. My entire junior gang does very good job, and they all have learned it from Menicanti because he operated my place many times. Now, if you look at his reduction of post the end systolic volume is 73%. And look at the stitch trial, it is 18%, 16%. Now that becomes little BS. And so none of us in the surgical world took stitch trial seriously. So that is for your references, that when you send a patient with a LV like that. So this also is, this is from Menicanti himself, the surgical ventricular restoration. And you can just eyeball NYHA, ejection fraction, end systolic volume. And on any score, hands down. Mitral valve repair, to cut it short, any patient on echo, when you are sending the patient for, if the patient has got severe mitral regurgitation, insist on the mitral valve to be fixed. And mitral valve to be studied after anesthesia is given by the surgeon, by a TE, that is bullshit, because after we give anesthesia, there is a vasodilatation, and that any MR will fall down, and you will misjudge and underestimate the MR. The MR is decided by you before you refer the patient, and a severe MR, it has to be fixed. If you don't fix, you give him a less lifespan, and those patients will come back. They will bleed financially like anything. By every year 4 admissions in the ICU, and every ICU admission in private, they will spend 2 lakhs and come back. Why it is not going forward? Can I have the next slide? Okay, thank you. Carotid endarterectomy versus stenting. There is absolutely no froth here, no discussion here. Carotid endarterectomy is a far superior procedure, cheaper, less stroke, extremely good long-lasting result. And in a surgeons like my team, we have done about 1,000 endarterectomies till now. The endarterectomy has become silly junior operation in our hands. It takes exactly 35 to 40 minutes skin to skin. We do it as an adjunct to coronary bypass surgery. Majority of our carotid endarterectomy is done awake with the cervical epidural. And if you have to do carotid stenting, you have to always have a filter. Extremely expensive, but on any scores, anywhere in literature, hands down, endarterectomy better. So, and also you must understand 33% of the patients who have a triple vessel disease in your cath lab will have a carotid disease. But most of the time you are looking at the angio and nobody puts a stent here. The stent is not even there. So don't do that. And stent, just 2 seconds, is such an arrogant bruit, nobody can miss it. So everybody who's got a IHD, put a stent there, you feel a bruit, get a Doppler done. Doppler shows a significant lesion. They must have a multi-slice CT, and the CT will tell us whether this is a good enough candidate for endarterectomy or not, endarterectomy. And if the CT doesn't show favorable, it's going too high, then you can talk of a filter and stenting. So aortic stenosis, another major confusing area for you. If you look at the tight aortic stenosis natural history, look at these cancers, breast cancer, lung cancer, colorectal cancer, 5-year survival. Look at the severe aortic stenosis. It has a worse outcome than all these cancers. So it needs something to be done. Should you be sending to surgeon for open surgery, or should you be sending him to cardiologist for a TAVI? Now, a person who has got a high risk criteria, got a tight aortic stenosis, he's got a likely benefit from a TAVI in the long run when he has got bad risk factor for surgery and anatomically suitable for TAVI. Is a good patient to set away send to the cardiologist and they will do a good job. But the problem across the world is there is so much money involved in this area by the device making companies that the money is astronomical. And today, the politics of TAVI, it is scaring even the governments of different countries, especially India. So if you look at this politics, you will see surgical, if you look at the risks, more the risk, more preference for TAVI. Lesser the risk, more preference for surgery. But if you look at how the papers are coming day by day, it is encroaching everywhere. I was attending a program in Delhi, and there was a very important man who is one of the leaders for TAVI. He presented a case report. This was a man in early 50s. They did a Medtronic TAVI valve and they pushed it too much inside. And so it started aborting the anterior mitral leaflet. And so there was a huge MR and the patient was not doing well. They had to put him on a ventilator. So they took him back to the theater, put him on heart-lung machine, opened it up. What do we do now with the mitral valve? They cannot dare to replace it just for this stupid complication. So they went in and they snipped the leg of the TAVI valve. And the mitral valve got free. They brought him back, did very well. And he had the cheek to come and present it to all we seniors in India that as a case report. Now I don't understand what was the business to be doing this in a patient who is in his early 50s. And second thing is, how could he withstand all that complicated surgery on heart-lung machine? Why you could not just do a simple AVR? And at the end of this particular chapter, I'm going to show you what are the long-term results of a open surgery bioprosthesis, how long they can last. And you can imagine the same valve, you have crimped and folded and put it in the catheter and you're putting inside. How can it compare its longevity head to head with an open valve, which we are so careful, don't even touch, all the time putting water, and we put carefully, and it's so well tanned. So it's not possible to imagine the same longevity, whatever the kind of circuses the literature may play, which is sponsored by these companies. So let me go to the next slide. So I will just quickly run, all these trials that are done, you all know, but I want to pick up some holes here. If you look at a partner 2A and 3SI, S3I trial, whatever the conclusion was, the drawback is the propensity matched and not a RCT. Partner 2A trial, long-term durability assessments of transcatheter bioprosthetic valves are still lacking, and extrapolation of these findings to low-risk patients requires further clinical trial validation. Now, if the concerns are, if you're talking about patients with lower intermediate risk patients and you send them for TAVI, which is a query longevity of that valve, what about stroke? What about paravalvular leak? What about new pacemaker? What about durability? What about leaflet immobility? What about valve thrombosis? These valves are all crimped. They will definitely have more thrombus than a nice open bioprosthesis. Whatever the literature may say, these doubts continue. So if the patient is not high risk, the surgeon can very easily operate that person, he or she. I think they should go to surgeons. Now, advantages are surgical valve replacement are survival, stroke, paravalvular leak, new pacemaker, durability, and this leaflet thrombosis. They are definite advantages by sending. So if you look at this survival, stroke, same. All other things, surgery is better. Whatever may be the trials. Now, this subclinical leaflet thrombosis. This is a very important, huge paper. Look at transcatheter valve, 13.4%. Surgical open AVR, 3.5%. 3 months you give anticoagulation, that will not help. Surgical TAVI trial risk. Look at this. Permanent heart block and AR. This side is the TAVI, that side is surgery. Degeneration again. I will, 50% will degenerate, whatever thickest valve, the Edward valve, 50% will degenerate in 8 years. And half of them will fail by that time. Degeneration is by gradient and by AR. Now, if you look at between those devices, TAVI valve by Medtronic, TAVI valve by Edward, there's so much of gross difference. So there is a lot of slippery data, and you must be able to navigate yourself, your referring doctor, through this jungle. So double standards. Double standards, remember, cheaters never prosper unless they are celebrities. And that's what is the problem with all these major device companies. So at this time, TAVI is a wonderful innovation with limited applications, superior in a very small spectrum. Compromising durability for novelty is not correct. It stands on slippery data, huge drain on scarce healthcare resource. Now look at this paper, which is an important paper published in 2014, when today we have very sleek bioprocesses available in the market. The Avilus valve, the trifecta valve. In 2014, these were not there as the mainstream valve. But despite of that, if you look at the 15-year follow-up, you can see that the reoperation rate was 12.1% at the end of 15 years. Today's sleek valves are able to give you no reoperation for 20 years. So if done properly, done carefully. So that there ends my advice to you about TAVI versus surgery. Anybody who is a high-risk patient who got comorbidity, one of our senior who was my classmate, Bhanushali, his wife was recovered from breast cancer. She was obese. She had a lung problem, and I myself told him that you better get a TAVI done. Those kind of patients, TAVI, patients who look to be well preserved, open surgery. The cost difference again is quite gross. The endovascular stent grafting or open surgery for aortic aneurysms. Here, the endovascular stent grafting has scored very beautifully now. Anybody who has got a descending thoracic aneurysm, anybody who has got an abdominal infrarenal aneurysm, there is no open surgery today. They all should go for endovascular stent grafting. Person who has come for a type A dissection or an arch dissection, a type A dissection, it has to be surgery. There is just no choice. And we can put a elephant trunk. Even if there's an arch involvement, we can do an arch operation. And later on, if the abdominal aortic problem starts, we can always go back and fix with a stent grafting. If the patient is young, then the matter is different. All the youngsters who come for aneurysm or dissection in India, they have a connective tissue disorder like Marfan's. And in them, the endovascular stent grafting will be a very different story. So anybody who's young, anybody who's got a type A dissection, send them to surgeons. Anybody who's old, anybody who doesn't have type A, send them to cardiologists, and all that can be fixed. Those who have an arch problem, it has to be a hybrid. I can do a arch exclusion. That means ascending, you can see in this lower diagram down below there. And I can do a ascending aorta to all the carotid and subclavian bypass. Cut off all the arch vessels, and the cardiologist can do the stent grafting. If you can see this, this is one of my patients who was almost 80 years old. He had come with an acute, he had undergone by me a Bentall with a triple vessel bypass surgery in the past. He was a physician, and he had come back many years later with another dissection in the arch, which was leaking with a hemoglobin of 5 grams. But lovely, we did an arch exclusion, and the cardiologist put 2 stents. The triple vessel bypass was via Lima and Rima. So they spared that rim of the aorta from where the subclavian was coming, and the subclavian I supplemented while putting a graft from the ascending aorta. And so, to summarize, anybody who is young and who has got type A dissection and young patient for all over, you could send to surgeon and they could take a decision. So these are some of the slides which I borrowed from Bashi. Bashi is one of the leading aortic surgeons of this country. But I think I already summarized this, so I'll not waste your time. HOCM, hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy. ASA is associated with the increased likelihood of complication, that is septal ablation by alcohol is likely to be associated with increased likelihood of complications such as permanent pacemaker implantation, sustained VT, VF, and reintervention. The septal ablation has failed. anybody who has got a discrete hookum which is causing an outflow obstruction for the LV has to go for surgery. And today, there are some centers which are excellent. See, we have done a huge number of hookum surgeries, but I can see now a lot of many my junior surgeons, because we held so many training programs, that there's a large batch of surgeons across India who can do a good job. And the surgeon who knows how to cut the septum well, it's just a single dose of cardioplegia job, 15 minutes. Clamp, open the aorta, and 15-20 minutes, we can take out the muscle and close the aorta. So it's a good surgery, and all these patients should go to surgeons. And the surgeon thinks otherwise, very, very few patients may be for septal ablation. So these are the two papers. One was recent, 2015, and same story again. Every paper sings the same song. So thank you very much. And if there are any questions, we can all ask about it.
Hello.
I hope I was very clear.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Antony, sir, are you audible? Kindly unmute.
Yes, it was beautiful, absolutely very clear, very precise, and very, very well executed. I think both Pailajani as well as Vivek's were very, very excellent. And of course, Diane of surgery, no need.
Yeah. Any comments from your side for our students?
I think, yeah, they should learn from these people who have been remarkable surgery, remarkable work they've done for a long time.
Sir, one question, sir. How common in your center you do non-LED CABGs?
Non-LED CABG, only if there is a concomitant disease. I'm doing a AVR, I'm doing a mitral fixing. Otherwise, no, not whatever.
And at what size of septum you will go for, you will ask us for?
Yeah, we usually don't look at the size of the septum. We look at the gradient. Gradient is non-dynamic, gradient is dynamic. If the gradient is high, we know this LV is going to fail, then we are indicated. The septum thickness we see for the surgical technique, so that we warn ourselves how much we go inside. And we have some of our own country formulas that the 21 blade that I have, it's 1.2 centimeters. So I just roughly stab my blade, go right up to there, and then I start hooking.
Sir, in your cath lab, how many times the complicated patients like rupture while putting a stent or pericardial effusion stent, or how often you take them for surgeries?
So the whole thing has now changed like anything. When I went to Bangalore to establish Jayadeva Institute, there was no stenting, there was no balloon dilatation at all. And Dr. Rao was with me, Chandrasekhar Rao. When the stenting came in and then we started, I had so many sleepless nights. I think almost every day I used to go and operate a CABG for a ruptured OBA. Now, I don't even remember for many years when I have done an emergency. Very, very rare. I would say 2 times or 3 times a year, because my volumes are so large and there are many junior cardiologists also. Very rare.
Last question, sir. How often you see an infected stent center coming?
I've never seen an infected stent, and these our schemes came in, and because the schemes came in, the schemes are designed so badly that we have been kind of arm twisting all the smaller centers. Say, like for example, Gulbarga, you don't have that economic might, and you want to have the scheme patients. So then came this business about cutting the stent in half, recycling the stents, re-sterilizing so many equipments. And then we started seeing an epidemic of infected stent. Infected stent is a very bad news. Mortalities are high. Surgery is very messy. And I think whatever may be the story about governance, we should not cross a lower red line or Lakshman Rekha of our self-discipline.
Are there any questions from the audience?
How to manage VSR?
Overlook those slides. His question was ventricular septal rupture after a myocardial infarction. Now in Gulbarga, this will be a little problematic situation. But if something like that happens in Bangalore, Pune, Solapur, wherever there is cardiac surgery available, what happens in septal rupture? There is a sudden load on the right ventricle and the patient will start failing. If we decide, because a lot of people say you put on IBP, you wait, let the patient stabilize. If you decide to wait, then what happens? You are erring for a natural selection. Whomever God did not mean to survive, they will die. And my operative results will be very good. But that's not the problem of the patient. If this patient is diagnosed in the hospital, most of these patients will be brought very fast to the hospital. And you may not be able to hear a murmur. All these patients have to be echoed. And the echo will show that there's a rupture. When there's a rupture, there should be no discussion, no talking. They straight have to go to OT table. We have an arrangement with my hospital administration that they don't interfere. They are not harassing us for the money or financial clearance. We will somehow manage in other cases. So any patient whom the cardiologist diagnoses to have a ventricular septal rupture, he will talk to the family. The family most of the time doesn't fuss around when they know patient will die. And straight away within minutes, he comes to my OT table. And we are a very organized center. So within minutes, we have scrubbed him and we can go on heart lung machine very fast. Once we are on heart lung machine, then the load is gone. Those patients who are lucky to get operated very fast or get onto heart lung machine very fast, they have a very low mortality. And those who come with lactic acidosis, we shouldn't be operating because most of them die. Then we should wait for natural selection. So the short answer to your question is, if you diagnose VSR and you are in a place where surgery can be done quickly, straight away to the OT table. CT angiograms have become much slicker, much better, but today we are still not there that I will operate only or do a stent only by CT angio.
What if a patient undergoes primary PCI and eventually land up in stent thrombosis? Will there be a medical approach or a surgical approach?
So if there is a thrombus and all, best is to remove the extra thrombus. If there is a constraints of getting cath lab and all, then you can as well lies. But at that point of time, we don't have much options for surgical options. If there is stent thrombosis, best is to go again, redo the procedure, post-arrest the same stent, and if possible, if there is a thrombus load and all is there, you have got the devices to extract the thrombus, we can extract the thrombus.
The translation of what just now was answered was, it's a hot MI. If you try and operate a case with the hot MI, your mortality risks are higher. If they can get away with a PCI like that, that's the best option for the patient. And today we have too many tricks in the armamentum of a cardiologist who can bail out a situation like that.
Dr. Cherian, sir?
Yes.
Yeah. It was an excellent deliberation and a thought-provoking deliberation from you.
Thank you.
Our people are very much excited to see your whole journey of 45 years in Indian cardiac surgery. So what are your take-home messages to our young generations?
Take-home message, simple. The guy who passes his DM or MCH or whatever it is, the next day they want to drive a BMW or Mercedes. Don't think about that. You have to work hard. When you are young, work hard, contribute something. Everybody, I told you, as far as I'm talking about as a cardiac surgeon. A cardiac surgeon with a limited ability. I'm not like a super fellows. There are some super fellows here. No. I'm talking about an average surgeon. Average surgery is straightforward. So, I think if you can get good results for average surgery, I think that is the best we can offer. Now, complex problems, give it to complex problems who are dealing with that quite often with a good team. Surgeon might operate well, but then it is the responsibility of the team to see that they are trained well. I told you in the beginning itself, Bombay had good surgeons, Delhi had good surgeons. A.K. Vasu did the first inflow occlusion of aortic valvotomy. Vellore had, good surgeons and a long history. Why they didn't progress? You tell me. Why? Now all these people are talking big. What have they now? Cardiologists. Now you are talking about TAVI. Till Merrill came out with, their wall. What have we done? We are talking about after, this is nothing personal. After making or copying Biogshaili wall, we are talking about Chitra wall. Tell me which hospital or which institution has tried to make a bioprosthetic wall. Now you are putting TAVI. What is the wall which is used in TAVI? It is a bovine jugular vein. You know what is the average size of a bovine jugular vein in Indian buffalo? You might ask me whether I am a veterinary surgeon. No, but I know it. It cannot be more than 18 millimeter. Maximum is 18. Now you also know that what is the stent made up of? Stent is made up of nitinol. You know which company makes nitinol in this country? There is only one. That is NAL, National Aeronautic Limited. Memory metal can be made by them. If you are in the field, then only you will know. You take these things to your Professor Vijay Raghavan, who is advisor for Prime Minister, or take it to, Bangalore, that institute, or to any of the IITs. I'll tell you the reason why I'm saying is, we wanted to produce very recently artificial blood and artificial plasma. It is not artificial, it is augmentation of RBC and platelets. We know we can do it. We know we can grow organs, solid organs like kidney, liver, heart, pancreas, lungs from our stem cells. But you know what we need? CDSCO people ask me. They are asking as if they are experts. So I said, you need a bioreactor. I asked them, you tell me where will you get a bioreactor? They have no idea. So they said, I said, IIT Madras will make it. You know the answer? From that professor, distinguished professor of CDSCO, Madras IIT can't do it. I said, can you do it? Unfortunately, he is from Delhi. He said, he doesn't know. Then you should not talk to it. And I told him, it is not single chamber bioreactor what you need a dual chamber bioreactor. You know how much it costs? They have no idea. You don't ask questions if you do not know.
7521.
If you know well, you ask. A bioreactor today, dual chamber bioreactor costs 14.5 crores. There is only one company making it in the whole world. That is from Berlin. The name is Sartorius. This is the first time they are here. They are the people who are asking, and they are the people who are, deciding whether your project is right or wrong. What right they have got? This is like N.K. Ganguly. He retired as a professor of microbiology or something from All India Institute. He was the chairman of CSIR. When I presented, along with me, who was there, the technical expert, that is Sampath Kumar. Along with me, he was sitting. He was the only cardiac surgeon. First question asked by the chairman, who is Angay Ganguly, is there rheumatic fever in India now? He was professor of microbiology. Can you imagine? I'm very, very open about it. Let anybody take any action against me. I'm a 79-year-old man. I cannot be, they can't say they will hold my pension, gratuity, that I don't need any damn thing. But science should progress, cannot progress because of this bureaucracy as well as all our, all the other red tape is.
True, very true.
Thank you, sir.
Now listen, you are all sitting there, you are all professors. Why can't you people open your mouth and talk? Tell me. What will happen to you? Nothing will happen. You may hear that, this fellow was shot down because he was a terrorist. That's the best way now. I think you all must be regretting why the hell I called this fellow here.
Not sure.
Yeah, nothing like that, sir. Your points are well taken. It is a big lesson to the youngsters. Those who want to take the.
For them only I am saying this.
Yeah.
This is for the youngsters. The youngsters of this country, as the Swedish, innovation, that is progress. If there is no innovation, there is no progress in the country. This is what we have to learn. You might not be a rich man. You might not be able to give your wife a Mercedes 350 SCL every birthday or your wedding anniversary. No, you can't do it.
Thank you so much, sir, for your exhaustive lecture and thought-provoking. I request Dr. Antani, sir, to comment for the closing remarks.
I think we are really privileged today having Dr. Cherian, the Doyen of Surgery and pioneering surgery, Dr. Vivek Javri, a very esteemed surgeon now, and Dr. Pahalajani has done a great job today making us aware and getting into the updates in surgery as well as medical cardiology. We really thank them immensely for these contributions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your kind words. Dr. Dev Palajani has left for an emergency. We thank him also for sparing his valuable time. Thank Dr. K.M. Cherian, sir, for sparing your valuable time to update our students and the youngsters. I thank Dr. Vivek Jolly also from Bangalore, who has come physically to deliver his lecture. I once again thank our own faculty, Dr. J. Antani, sir. Thank you very much.